So we are very, very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Ivan Katchanovski, who is a Ukrainian and Canadian political scientist at the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. Professor, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's really our honor to have you here. It's hard to even know where to start because it's such a wild story. But I guess the Maidan issue was sort of the first thing a lot of people in the West ever heard about any tensions between Ukraine, Russia, or anything like that. It led to a lot of different ripple effects that maybe led us to where we are now in many ways. I guess maybe if you could just give us a capsule view of what people maybe don't know if they think they've heard of the Maidan massacre.
I think most people have no idea actually what happened during this Maidan massacre, which was a very crucial event, which led to overthrow of the Yanukovych government and later led to Russian annexation of Crimea, to civil war in Donbass, Russian military interventions in Donbass, and finally Russia escalated this war and the conflict in Ukraine and with Ukraine and the West and invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. So most narrative promoted by absolute majority of the media and politicians and government officials is that this massacre was committed by government snipers or police, Berkut police unit, specifically against activists of Maidan, a mass protest movement, who actually were peaceful protesters against the Yanukovych government. And this story basically is told by all major media, not only in the United States, but in all major other countries, with just few exceptions like BBC reported in 2015 and German television documentary in 2014. So all these stories are basically false because they are contradicted by evidence which I examined, and also just kind of contradicted by the Maidan massacre trial decision, which was issued in October of last year, but was totally blocked out in terms of actual revelations, which confirms that this massacre was committed not by government snipers or government police units, but actually was committed by snipers who were affiliated with Maidan forces, specifically far-right one.
So why does this matter today? I mean, we're obviously in a different era of war in Ukraine. So the media is completely ignoring these revelations, which you have already covered before. But why? Why ignore it? What would it mean if we were to be honest, or if the media were to be honest about what took place in 2014? What would it mean about what's taking place in Ukraine today?
I think this is a crucial massacre, which I already mentioned, and actually a subtitle of my book, which is entitled "Maidan Massacre in Ukraine," is mass murder, which changed the world, basically, because it had effect not only on Ukraine but also for the entire world, because it led to all these conflicts in Ukraine and now to the major war between Russia and Ukraine, and which is also became a proxy war between West and Russia in Ukraine, and still is ongoing civil war in Donbass. So this is, I think, a very important issue, and I think that media blackout of this massacre, despite 10th anniversary of this crucial event, and despite Maidan massacre trial decision, which was again was quite unexpected for me personally, because I did not expect that they would issue such decision based on partially on evidence. Actually, this was blackout by the media was done specifically and to kind of not to reveal this information, which is publicly available, because all the documents which I examined, all my studies, peer-reviewed publications, and a book which would be published soon by major Western academic press, all this evidence now is supported by Maidan massacre trial decision, which was issued by Ukrainian judges and jury, and again with total blackout by the media, just with few major exceptions, with few notable exceptions in the West. I think this is just amazing to see this, because I think this is very important story, and it will still be very important for a very long time.
I mean, it feels like also one of the sort of elements coming out of the sort of real story here of what took place is, you know, in terms of the internal politics of Ukraine, the role of some of these far-right forces, because, I mean, obviously there were already huge protests on the street. The Yanukovych government was already, you know, facing a lot of heat from its own people. So, I mean, it seemed like to conduct this massacre was really a very political decision to try to drive a particular, you know, political narrative that would be favorable to one group. I mean, how do you think that this this overall story reflects on our understanding of the role of some of these far-right forces in Ukraine.
And I think this is another important issue which is also basically not covered and just ignored by the media for political reasons, because and also misrepresented by Russia, because Russia falsely claimed that this massacre was an overthrow of Yanukovych was fascist or neo-Nazi coup, and so on. So in my research, I look into all available evidence, and I can say that based on such evidence, there is now no kind of denial that the far right, specifically right sector and Svoboda party, were involved in this massacre because they controlled the Hotel Ukraina, which was one of the locations of Maidan snipers who shot Maidan protesters, and they also control music conservatory and main post office building, which was controlled by the right sector during the massacre. And according to even a verdict issued by the Ukrainian judges and jury, these locations were used to shoot at both police and protesters during this massacre. So now Maidan massacre trial decision specifically confirmed my study and all the evidence that this massacre was committed by specifically many protesters were killed and wounded by snipers located in the Hotel Ukraina, and they specifically stated that this Hotel Ukraina was controlled by Maidan activists, and they specifically also stated that that in this Hotel Ukraina there was a group of armed Maidan protesters led or activists led by a far-right deputy of the Ukrainian parliament. And so this is the same deputy who is identified in videos, and in his own interviews he publicly admitted, and many members of his far-right led group admitted, that they shot police, and later they were filmed in the Hotel Ukraina, which was, according to the Maidan massacre trial decision, was one of the locations in which snipers massacred Maidan protesters. And they shot also, according to the decision, confirming my research, that they shot also at BBC television journalists. And so this is just quite amazing. Again, they were involved in this massacre, but Russia claimed that this was a fascist coup, Nazi coup, and so on. This is also false and used to justify Russian invasion of Ukraine, because this massacre was not committed just far right by themselves. There were other elements of Maidan opposition involved in this massacre, oligarchic parties like Fatherland, and they also came to power after this massacre. And there was also a Western-led regime change in Ukraine. So this was a very complex event, which I think very important to understand in all complexity, including the role of far right in this massacre and conflicts which led to this massacre and also which escalated from this massacre.
And when we talk about the massacre you're speaking of and the involvement of right-wing forces, what is the role of those right-wing forces today in Ukraine?
I think, again, there are two different narratives. One is promoted by the West and the Ukrainian government and the media, and the same with Western politicians and the media, that far right in Ukraine is not important. They are marginal. There are no neo-Nazis basically in Ukraine. They are not existent, or they basically transform into regular Ukrainian military forces. They abandon their far right ideology, neo-Nazi ideology and symbols and so on. And there is a narrative promoted by the Russian media and the Russian government, and they have totally opposite narrative, claiming that Ukraine is Nazi state or neo-Nazi state, that Nazis are in power in Ukraine. And again, I think based on my research, and I have a book chapter which will be published in another book about conflicts in Ukraine, which is called From the Maidan to the Russia-Ukraine War. I examine the role of far right in Ukraine, and I can say that numerically, far right in Ukraine, including neo-Nazis, are quite small. And they do not have majority political support in Ukraine, but they have very significant power in Ukraine, which is much more larger and much more significant than their numbers would imply, because they rely on violence. They have their own armed formations, like neo-Nazi-led Azov brigades now, which was originally battalion. Now they have separate brigades, which are formally incorporated into Ukrainian armed forces and National Guard, but they are actually led by open neo-Nazis. And there are also far-right formations, other formations like Right Sector and other far-right and neo-Nazi organizations. And they have power to influence government policy. They actually threatened Zelensky not to sign a peace deal and to end this war in Donbass, actually before the Russian invasion. And they now openly, again, can challenge Zelensky and his power and his government and his policy if he would try to make a peaceful resolution of this war. So I think their power is very significant, and I think this is far right now in Ukraine are most powerful in the world because their alliance on violence, their involvement in the overthrow of Yanukovych government in 2014, and also because of kind of they have their own armed formations and they have total impunity from persecution. And just yesterday there was a just court decision issued in Ukraine, and which basically stated that State Security Service of Ukraine arrested or charged one of priests, actually one of the religious leaders of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, for justifying Russian invasion of Ukraine because he stated on his Facebook page that Azov regiment includes Nazis, basically. And so he now faces 8 years in prison for this and confiscation of his property. So this is like Ukraine, and this is just quite unbelievable because these fighters from neo-Nazi-led Azov regiment, they openly display their symbols, Nazi symbols, like they praise Hitler, Adolf Hitler, they use swastikas, they use other Nazi kind of symbols openly, again, without any consequences. And now people who say that even on Facebook that they are Nazis or neo-Nazis are actually facing kind of such a punishment, which is quite unbelievable in any kind of democratic country with and rule of law. So this is, I think, quite also revealing that this is subject, I think, with very important issue and importance, and Maidan massacre just justifies this in terms of importance of the far right, which is not reported correctly by the media, both in Ukraine and in the West and in Russia also, and the same applies to politicians in all these countries because they just try to kind of just change the narrative and change the evidence in their own favor for political reasons and not based on evidence.
And let me just ask you this one final thing as well. I mean, because I believe, as you said you were, I also was quite surprised to see the Ukrainian court decision. But you know, so there's just court decisions and court decisions. Are the people, the killers, going to really be held accountable here? I mean, I'm sure for the loved ones of those who died, it's probably been a long issue of not having anyone truly held accountable. Or will it be sort of the verdict is issued, but perhaps some of those involved will be able to escape accountability?
No, I think there is no such possibility because actually Ukrainian investigation prosecutor general office, they denied publicly that there were any snipers located in the Hotel Ukraina in other Maidan control locations. Even now, this contradicted by the decision by the Ukrainian court. And again, but there are no investigations. They still claim that there were snipers, that there was only presence of the government police forces, Berkut, and also this decision by the judges also stated specifically that Yanukovych or his leaders of his government, ministers from his government, did not order Maidan massacre. Again, but the prosecutor general office still claims that Yanukovych was responsible for this massacre, gave order, and so on. Even so, there is no such evidence. So they still do the same with other members of his government, and the decision by this kind of court in Ukraine also claims that Berkut police were responsible for murder of many and killing and wounding of many protesters on their own. Basically, they stated that they did this in response to killing of one of the members of their unit by Maidan snipers. But again, according to the evidence and even according to this decision, they did not convict anybody actually in person. They acquitted 2 Berkut policemen who were actually present in person during this trial, and they convicted only in absentia 3 other policemen from Berkut forces who actually were exchanged by Zelensky to Russia or to Donbass separatists. So they're actually not in prison, and evidence against them actually is tampered up because, based on my research, including even testimonies of absolute majority of wounded protesters, they testified that they were shot by snipers located in Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan control locations, and not by the Berkut. also have no incentive to actually convict and to have justice in this case, in the case of Maidan massacre.
Wow. Amazing that this is not more widely known. But thank you so much for all your diligent research here on this, Professor Ivan Katchanovski with the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. Thank you so much for helping us illuminate some of this here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.